Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 22 of Outlaw Star. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, there was a bit of a breakthrough in regards to the galactic ley line. You know, Jean and the group found a sort of ancient temple that was pivotal, I guess, and in the process of exploring and things like that, the McDougal showed up. There was a conflict between them. You know, that's kind of a nice way of saying, like, they got into a bit of a fight, but things were pretty decisively finished when Jean essentially mangled the younger McDougal brother. You know, we don't know what really happened, but I reckon we'll see pretty soon. Now, the upshot is that Dr. Khan, this guy who's cropped up every now and again, has told the crew of the Outlaw Star, hey, you guys are going to be making a prison break. Now, something I think is interesting about this prison break episode is that it absolutely sticks in my mind right alongside with an episode of Dirty Pair. And that was an episode where the Dirty Pair go in and they don't perform a jailbreak per se, but a jailbreak is going on and they go to prevent things. So, I don't know, it's between these two things that I kind of can't quite keep them entirely straight because both of them involve sort of like diving down into a planet, I reckon, or something to that effect. Like, the term gravity well springs to mind. And, you know, I guess case in point, with the title of the episode being Gravity Jailbreak, you know, I reckon gravity is going to be a fairly important thing. And I guess when you get down to it, you know, if you were to have a prison on a planet, it would probably behoove you to put it on like a really high density planet or something with like lots of gravity, you know, just because like if someone breaks out of the facility that's rendered to be, you know, 1G nominally, then, you know, you get like crushed pretty quickly. Yeah, so here we go. You know, a lot of the planet has abnormal gravitational conditions. You know, 1G is what we have here on Earth. That's what we're used to. That's what our muscles and skeletal structure are adapted to. But if you have a planet that has like 3Gs or 10Gs, you know, the human body can only withstand so much of that. You know, there could be a case in which we humans could inhabit a planet with higher gravity, but like, it would be a real struggle. I feel like it would almost be comparable to something like Colorado, you know, the state where it's a fair bit higher above sea level than a lot of the rest of the country, and as a result, the air's a bit thinner. So if you travel there and you're not used to there being a thinner atmosphere, you know, you can kind of have a rough go of things if you're unprepared. And it's not exactly comparable, but I feel like adapting to different gravity conditions is a similar kind of struggle. You know, it's one of those things that, like, you don't really think of just because, generally speaking, gravity is roughly the same everywhere on Earth. And, you know, if it is different, it's not really different in a way that you would ever notice it. So when things do change, you know, that's when things get really, really interesting. But I dare say no one's had much experience of entirely different gravity except for, you know, astronauts that have been to the moon. And even then, like, I want to say it's what, like a third or a sixth the gravity of Earth. So it's like, it's different for sure, but it's not entirely, you know, 0G. You can sort of like jump and drift back to the planet and all that. Although that said, you know, low gravity is entirely different from high gravity, just because I feel like everything would be a pain, really. You know, walking around would become difficult. Any sort of physical exertion would be difficult. I feel even laying down to try and go to sleep would be deeply uncomfortable, you know. Now, this is interesting. You know, Gwen Khan here is explaining to us that most of the gravity on the planet is like 3 Gs, including where the prison is, but it's 10 Gs at the pole. And I guess the question is, what kind of pole here? Are they talking like magnetic pole or the pole, you know, the axis upon which it spins? Because I was given to understand... Well, no, actually, that does check out. Gravity is slightly weaker around the equator just because of how the planet spins, generally speaking. So, yeah, I guess that all checks out. Now, unfortunately, in this flashback, it seems like everyone was trying to caution Jean about going to this planet with its, you know, abnormal gravity. And, given the knowledge that no one's ever broken out of this prison successfully alive, Jean's a little too, eager, I guess, to get involved. Because, like, with a reputation like that, I certainly wouldn't want to do it. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to visit a planet with 3 times the gravity I'm used to, if, you know, for any longer than, like, just to see what it's like. You know, I feel like once I set down on, like, a 3G planet and I crumble like a wet leaf, I feel like I'd want the gravity to stop and go back to normal pretty quickly. So I guess the question is the gravity within the prison normal? I feel like it must be, just to ensure the safety of the prisoners. You know, not that I get the impression the warden is remarkably concerned about that sort of thing, but, you know, there's no point in having a prison if you just, kill everyone, you know, like, I mean, I suppose maybe these people don't remarkably care too much, but, like, just from a purely logical perspective, if you're going to the trouble of imprisoning people, you want things to be, like, habitable. Now, I guess speaking of inhabitable, you know, Jean can't even, like, get up onto the bed he's been supplied. And, you know, the bed, like, they can't even really call it that, you know, it looks more like a concrete slab to me, but yeah, it seems like this whole place is really, rather inhospitable. I do find it interesting, however, as a side note, that all of the wardens, aside from, like, the main guy in charge, are all robotic. It makes sense in a way, you know, robots can be built to withstand higher gravity, and therefore they have an innate advantage. Otherwise, you know, if you had, like, real flesh and blood guards, they'd have to be remarkably bulky and well built to, you know, have the muscle to walk around normally in 3Gs. You know, in a weird sort of way, I feel like Dragon Ball has sort of devalued the concept of higher gravity. Because I seem to recall it was fairly early on in Dragon Ball Z. Like, Vegeta mentioned offhand something to the effect of Planet Vegeta having 10 times Earth's gravity, so, like, you know, he feels all lightweight on planet Earth and all that. And, like, just thinking, you know, twice Earth's gravity, like, I wouldn't want to live in that. That would be incredibly onerous. But, like, 10 times is insane. You know, like, a 6-foot-tall guy weighing 200 pounds would weigh a ton on something like Planet Vegeta. Like, it's just nuts. Like, imagine being able to move under those conditions. Like, it's crazy. And Dragon Ball doesn't stop there either. You know, I seem to recall Vegeta training in, like, artificial gravity of 150 times Earth's gravity, which, you know, that's, rather remarkably insane as well. Now, it seems as though the Warden is giving us a little bit of exposition here regarding other prisoners who have tried doing stuff and who, you know, potentially have earned the enmity of others. You know, so this one prisoner, presumably with explosives, blew a hole in the wall and has tried to make his escape. Now, the trouble is, the gravity's one thing, but it seems like most of the planet's an arid desert, which, you know, that's not remarkably hospitable either. I feel like, of all the surfaces on which to tread in higher gravity, like, sand dunes are probably not great. Because I feel like you would kind of sink in those. Not that they're necessarily like quicksand, but with the shifting, unstable conditions, it would be hard to walk. And, you know, if you're making a prison break, it'd be hard to run. And I guess, like, judging by the tires on these robots, they're probably equipped to travel over the dunes. Oh dear. So that guy didn't fare too well. You know, we were kind of spared the gory details, but those robots were wailing on him. Yeah. So it seems like this veteran inmate is really just like giving Gene what for here. It's like, look, man, the robots can outflank you. Like, there's no escaping here. And it seems to me that the guy is being a bit conspicuous with his denial, because naturally, he's likely the guy Gene was sent here to spring free. But for someone to be so conspicuous publicly, I feel like they're really just kind of trying to, like, sound good for the warden and the people watching, you know? It's like, no, I'm a good boy. I would never try to break out of the prison. I would never do such a thing. I'm a model prisoner. Ooh. So Gene's playing a game here. Understandably so, perhaps. You know, trying to prick the guy's pride. I feel like if you've been in prison for a while, you kinda have like a better sense of things, and you're not necessarily willing to rise to the provocation. However, it could be more pragmatic. You know, with Gene talking about breaking out of here in the sauna, you know, I feel like that might be a good way to get the guards coming down on you. Ooh. So that's something, you know. The guy Gene was sent to find, like, he makes it clear that not only has no one escaped alive, but no one served out their sentence and lived either, just because, you know, your heart eventually gives out under the gravity. That's, quite dire. So I guess the question is, like, what is Gene's friend here planning? Because, like, he's clearly none too happy about being in prison, but he's not making any overt gestures about how he's going to break out of here. Now, this is something. It's generally inadvisable to fight in a sauna, I'd reckon. What with, like, the stone floors being slick with condensation. However, I feel like in these high gravity conditions, things are going to get real dangerous. Like, Gene tripped that guy. I reckon he probably cracked his head on the rock. Ooh, okay, that was a cryptic smile right there, with Gene saying, "Hey, have you ever considered, like, giving the warden a hard time?" And, that's probably the guy they should be going after. However, some people are making the salient point here that, like, Gene, you do kind of stand out, And, like, that is kind of the hallmark of Gene, but maybe, he should probably be a bit more tactful about doing things. I mean, I guess from his perspective, he's not actually a criminal, so, he's not necessarily going to die here. Although I feel like if the Outlaw Star were to come bust him out, like, they'd probably get more than they bargained for. Ooh. Alright, so Gene's leading with intrigue, I guess. Like, what would you do if I told you I had a surefire plan? And I guess naturally we can only assume the guy's going along with it, but I feel like in the little intervening bit that was cut out, there surely had to have been some serious convincing, because, like, the guy was not unreasonably pretty cynical about the whole thing, Oh, I think I see what's going on. It is kind of, probably not good to have, like, an electrical junction box inside a cell like that, Like, that's not good. At the very least, it should be, like, tamper-proof, which is to say, you really have to wail on it to do something. Okay, so the punishment facility the warden brings up. I mean, it's understandable that you would want to send, like, recalcitrant prisoners to the pit, so to speak, but, well, I guess they're going. I suppose I wasn't surprised that Gene would try and goad the warden to meet him face to face, but seeing as how we see the warden as a guy in a tube filled with fluid, that's probably not going to happen, Like, he has no real inclination to do so, much less the capacity. Alright, so it seems like the plan is springing into motion. If I had to guess, I would assume that they're sort of spoofing this thing with the linear car, trying to make it look like a malfunction. Well, never mind. It seems like they're just trying to outrun things, so to speak, hoping that increased gravity will act as a brake. That's not something I would necessarily want to bet on in Gene's position, but the plan seems to be working in that if they want to shut down the train, they have to shut down a bunch of other stuff too. So, I guess this is what you get for poorly planning your power systems, You need to have that on a separate breaker, otherwise things are going to get real messy. Case in point, I suppose. So for what it's worth, Gene's plan seems to be working so far, but with the warden robots trekking out into the desert after them, things could likely get a little bit messy. Now, I'm pretty sure Gene's got, like, a transmitter or something, but, ooh, that's interesting. Compass with 2 poles. I wonder what the point of that is. I'm sure we'll get, like, a rationale for it, but I guess I assumed it was a transmitter to call down the Outlaw Star. Ooh, maybe it'll, like, generate an EMP or something and short out the robots. Okay. Alright, so that's something. A monopole. Now that's interesting. I guess Gene's playing around with magnetism here. Although I feel like that's not really how it works. Because I was given to understand that any magnet has a north pole and a south pole. And that if you take a magnet with a north and south pole and you break it in half, you know, what was the junction that, you know, you broke into it, those become, you know, the opposite pole of the ones that they normally had. Like, you can't really have, like, a monopole. Unless, of course, this is some, like, bizarre novel physics. So, things seem to be working, I guess. Although, I would worry about, you know, Jim flying over to the pole, just because with, like, 10 Gs going on, that's dangerous, you know? I mean, not least for Gene and his friend there, just because, like, I don't know, you know, even if you do have, like, a magnetic monopole lifting you up, like, you are going to suffer the effects of gravity here. And I feel like just drawing them in on a winch like that, that's a lot of weight that's sort of dependent on grip strength. And, you know, a person can have good grip strength, but that's, not always sufficient, you know? Like, I feel like the average person can't really do much in the way of, like, pull-ups or anything that relies on grip strength and, like, upper body strength, you know? It's something that does require a lot of strength that people just don't generally possess. Alright, so that's interesting. You know, Gwen Khan's getting ahead of himself. Understandably so, I guess. You know. But it seems like everything's working out. You know, they helped Melfina out. She's back and alive and well and all that. So I guess the question now is, time to divulge information on the galactic ley line, right? I mean, maybe not, I guess. Oh dear. You know, suggesting killing Gwen Khan. It might not be a bad idea, but, geez. So I guess Gene now has coordinates to the galactic ley line, which means figuring things out is only a matter of time. But I feel like it's not going to be quite so easy as just following the coordinates, you know? Like, something tells me there are going to be a couple other trials and tribulations along the way. It's not just going to be as simple as going from point A to point B. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.